I'll make it up, I'll make it, I'll make it up, I'll make it
Good afternoon. It's Sunday, August 17th, 2025. You're watching Co-op for Two, and you're joining me for letter 2 of the Dear Holmes case, The Little God. Let's check in with the chat and see how everyone is doing today. YouTube says 10 concurrent viewers. As a reminder, this Sunday afternoon slot is when we play our play-by-mail games. Recently, for the last year or so, that means Dear Holmes, which is a subscription-based service. 1 letter each week, 4 letters in a case. By the time we get to the end, we'll be presented with the solution. There are no actions, there are no mechanics per se. You wouldn't even really call this a game. However, the game that we play is to try to figure out the case before the official solution comes from Sherlock Holmes. We'll do a little bit of a recap before we get started today, but is there anything else to talk about before we get started? A little bit. Tonight at 11 p.m. Central Standard Time, we'll be doing something quite unusual on this channel. We'll be playing a case for New York Noir, the board game Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective inspired game that I've been working on for the last 3 years with some help from the channel. And tonight we're going to play a case that's written by Anna, one of the regular viewers of the channel. A little bit of an experimental case. So I do hope you can join for that or watch it afterwards, and we can give some feedback to Anna on her case, some constructive criticism to help her as she writes additional cases. And if you are interested in writing a case for New York Noir, that might be a good stream to watch to familiarize yourself with some of the options. All right, well, if there's nothing else, no one is typing in the chat about any projects or hobbies they're working on. Let's get started with a little bit of a recap of our case. So this is letter 2 we're on. If you haven't watched the first session from last week, you should stop watching now. There's really no point to jumping in the middle. You should catch up first. Got a little bit of AI art that Rob created for us on the Discord. All right, so First letter, we've got Sir Horace Maxwell, who's attacked, a retired professor specializing in Aztec civilization, found almost dead in his office by his daughter, and we've been tasked with figuring out who would attack him and where is this statue, this very expensive 400-pound rare statue that was missing from his office. They do have a suspect, the Reverend Richard Clark. His daughter has hired us to try to clear him. All right, so the first letter we get is from the daughter. She describes what happened the night before the attack. She describes the relationship between Sir Horace, who's about 70, and her father, the Reverend, who's 50. This is the man who's been arrested for the crime. We're told Sir Horace has 2 adult children living in the house with him. Gerald, who's a carpenter, and Abigail, the daughter, both in their 50s, same age as the Reverend. They're all 20 years younger than Sir Horace. Sir Horace got this statue a few weeks ago and doesn't even let his children touch it or hold it or see it up close. He's having some issues with his kids. The statue itself is pretty small, 7 inches tall, 2 inches in diameter, called the Little God. A little Aztec statue sitting on a throne with his hand up, giving a blessing. More clues that Sir Horace is on the outs with his children. The Reverend makes a joke about stealing it, and Sir Horace says, "I'll take you out of my will if you did such a thing." So it sounds like the Reverend is in Sir Horace's will. We don't know exactly how rich Sir Horace is, but he lives in a mansion with maids, so obviously he's got some money. We get told that Sir Horace showed the Reverend the statue. The daughter calls him in for tea from the garden, which can look in through the glass of the study into Sir Horace's office. There's a little discussion about should the Reverend write a new edition of his book and mention this statue, have a chapter on this statue. The Reverend doesn't really want to do it. Okay, then we get told about when the Reverend and his daughter left shortly after dinner. They stayed till 7. They had dinner at 5. They heard a conversation between the father and Sir Horace and his son that sounded angry. They played cards. They went back to their hotel. We get this little weird thing that we don't really understand about the hotel they're staying at is only a mile away from Sir Horace's house, but it takes him 40 minutes to get there. I don't really understand. That seems like a bug. No one remarks on it. It's a little confusing, and it's sort of important because it matters whether the people could walk to his house easily or not. But maybe it takes 40 minutes to go by horse cab 1 mile. I don't know. That seems odd because you could walk it in 20. But maybe the horse walks slowly. All right. So the next letter we get, the second letter, is from Lestrade, who's investigating the case. So Horace is found in his office in the morning by the daughter. The door is ajar. It's normally kept locked if no one is in there. So she thinks maybe he's up late doing something. She finds the body. He's been hit on the head quite badly. He's in a coma. The French windows out into the garden were open. There's glass on the floor from the case where the statue was held. The other thing they noticed on the ground was a volume of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Was he reading that? Was he attacked with it? We don't know. The daughter says that his last words he was mumbling when she finds him, barely conscious, is that he was attacked by a tall man in black. Then he goes to the hospital. They talk, Lestrade talks to the daughter and son. The son asks, is he going to survive? Lestrade says he's not sure. The son breaks down in tears. He admits he was arguing with him the night before about the pedestal table, which Lestrade comments, yeah, it does. I can see why Horace didn't like it. It's large, ugly, has a big central leg, a top that makes it look more like a workbench. We're told the son is a carpenter, and if he says this is a peace offering, my conclusion is that the son has made this table. Some in the channel thought, large, ugly central leg. You've jumped to the conclusion, like many of these cases, that the stolen statue is hidden in the leg. It's possible, or it's a red herring. We get told that the son has been suggesting to his father to bring the Reverend over. Very suspicious. It's either that he plans on attacking his father and wants to frame the Reverend. Is that why he's been pushing his father to invite the Reverend over? Or I'm guessing, my pure story intuition is telling me that that's a red herring and that the son is keen on the daughter, but the Reverend's daughter, but I could be way off on that. They repeat the timeline about dinner at 5, but now we get told actually there were 2 more guests at the party. Miss Anne Marie Keegan and Robert Bernier, both scholars and old friends. More notes about the Reverend and his daughter going home at 7 p.m., getting to their hotel. And then we get a little bit more information on why the Reverend was arrested, because at the hotel they find out that the Reverend came down to the bar at the hotel dressed all in black and is tall, 6 foot. Was agitated, took a table by another local, Michael Hall. They talked a little bit about the statue. Then the Reverend leaves the hotel into town. Mr. Hall leaves soon after him. Mr. Hall seems quite suspicious, and we'll see why in a second here. When Lestrade talks to Michael Hall is not upset at all that Sir Horace was killed, a neighbor in town, because the 2 of them have been fighting in the courts, suing each other. Doesn't like our victim. Then Lestrade talks to the Reverend and finds out that the Reverend is actually in dire straits for money. He's been taking money from his church. They're about to do an audit. They're going to find out that he owes a lot of money for the church that he's been running, and he's going to be in trouble. And that, in fact, he asked at the previous night, asked Sir Horace to lend him money. Sir Horace said no. And then the Reverend talks about what he did at the hotel bar the previous night. He says he went down, he was chatting to this guy, Michael Hall. He mentioned the statue, realized, hey, I thought this guy was a friend of Sir Horace, so it was safe to talk about the statue. When I realized he wasn't, he realized he had been indiscreet in mentioning the statue. He goes out for a walk. He doesn't get back to the hotel till midnight, but he says the reason for that is that I got lost. And then Lestrade tells us that the statue is worth 400 pounds. So we've got reasons why the Reverend is so suspicious. He came down to the bar at 10 p.m., left, came back at midnight. Plenty of time to go attack our guy, Sir Horace Maxwell, and come back. We've also got this guy, Michael Hall, who's very suspicious, who left the hotel the same time the Reverend did. Did he go to Sir Horace's house and attack Sir Horace? Or did the son attack Sir Horace to make it look like the Reverend did it? A couple other possibilities as well. One I don't think we discussed, but seems open to consideration, is there's this interesting thing about how Sir Horace really wants the Reverend to write up Where is it? He really wants to write up a new he really wants the Reverend to write a new chapter about the statue in his book. And the Reverend says, where is that? The Reverend says, there'd have to be a lot. I need more story to put into a second edition. Where is that? And so you could imagine a staged attack in order to convince the Reverend, in order to make more interesting story to write up. Here, my father, he said, Sir Horace was delighted at the idea of putting a chapter about this statue in a new edition of the book. The Reverend was reluctant, asserting he would need to find a lot of material to add in order to justify second edition, which upset Sir Horace, who restated it was something I'd like to see done. So you could imagine a staged attack meant to create enough story to make for a new edition. There's also, to me, the biggest curiosity is why the son is so keen to have the Reverend over. Like, he wanted him over right away. Sister support his version of events, recalling that her brother regularly asked their father if he had yet invited the Reverend and when he would be coming to visit. So either my intuition's going to be right, that the son is keen on the daughter and that's why he wanted them over, or it's some sort of setup. All right, are we ready to read the new letter? Any other comments? All right, let's get out letter number 2 here. Anything I've missed in the recap or anything anyone want to draw attention to? Any early theories of this case? I mean, for me, Michael Hall, the angry neighbor who's heard about the statue, feels like a very good suspect. No one heard anything, says Marlene. No one heard anything. We don't have a murder weapon. All right. Let's get out letter number 2. There was one other thing I wanted to mention. So you know that I subscribe to Dear Holmes. It's not a cheap service. I think it ends up being something like $5 per letter. I can afford it because of the Patreon supporters of this channel. But I have no relationship with the company Dear Holmes, although I do appreciate that if they're not angry about this channel, they're fine with us broadcasting these. You might imagine they wouldn't be, because maybe you think they would be nervous that if people can watch this, that they won't subscribe themselves. But I think they're right to decide that people who love this kind of thing might be inclined to want to subscribe themselves. Anyway, that's just a long way of getting to the point that I have no relationship with them, but I did get an email from them announcing that they have a new service. They're part of a larger company that does historic subscription letters too, which you might be interested in, but they've got a new service called the Code Breaking Club. And it looks like instead of 1 letter per week, it's 1 letter per month, $9 a month. And you're getting a puzzle to solve that's wrapped around a narrative of code breaking and ciphers. So if you are really keen on code breaking cipher based puzzles, you might want to stop by the Dear Holmes folks and check out their new thing. It's not really for me. I sometimes appreciate and enjoy the cipher code breaking in games, but I don't want too much of it, and I need a big narrative around it. I'm not sure how much narrative is in their system, but this is more my speed. Okay, let's read today's letter. 15 July. I've received additional correspondence related to our case, one letter each from the daughter and son of the deceased. Both were delivered to me this morning. I've transcribed them for your review with esteem, Watson. Okay, so we're going to hear from the daughter first and then the son. Dear Dr. Watson, it was a surprise to receive your letter and a thrill to learn that Mr. Holmes has taken an interest in this matter. I've read the list of points that he sent to you, and I will endeavor to address them here. It is true that my brother and I are viewed in a poor light by our father. He only expected one thing of me, and that was to produce a grandson for him. He's old-fashioned, and there is little that can be done about that. My husband and I learned that we could not have children soon after our marriage. As a medical man, I'm sure you will understand that it is hardly my fault. Nevertheless, in his eyes, I had let my father down. A few years ago, my poor husband died, leaving me very little, and my father took me back in. Since then, I have endured an uneventful life, where I earn my keep by running the house and managing the maid and tradesmen. This enables father to focus on his personal endeavors. With my failure, all father's focus shifted to my brother. 5 years ago, under pressure, he married Julia, who is the daughter of one of my father's former colleagues and about 20 years younger than Gerald. It was very much an arranged matter, and there was no real love between my brother and his wife. The charade was kept up as neither of them wanted to incur the ire of their parents. My father constantly brought up the subject of grandchildren, and my brother was eventually forced to admit that the marriage was a sham. Julia continues to live in their former home, and Gerald joined me living under father's roof. I feel for him, as he is often the brunt of father's harsher remarks. Gerald has long had a natural ability with wood. Our mother encouraged him in the face of father's objections. Father has worked hard to, as he would put it, drag himself up, and saw his son as undoing some of that progress by pursuing a humble trade. He loved our mother so much that he kept his silence to please her, and Gerald worked as an apprentice for a good many years until he was able to set up for himself. He earns a respectable income for his work and is sought out across the country for both repair work and original pieces. Sadly, in the aftermath of mother's premature death, our father no longer felt the need to suppress his opinions. I merely get chastised for being barren. My poor brother is criticized for his profession and his failed marriage. We lead a poor existence, but neither of us has much choice. Yes, we are both bitter, but endure as best we can. I recall the day father was approached by Reverend Clark to endorse his book on the Aztecs. My father was disparaging when he first unwrapped the book and read the covering letter. He struggled to believe that a man of God could be genuinely interested in such a subject. Nevertheless, he read the book over a few days and was impressed from the start. Every meal would be dominated by his account of what he had read and how impressed he was with the Reverend's grasp of the subject. Upon finishing the book, he wrote a glowing recommendation and began a regular correspondence with Reverend Clark. The Reverend was invited to stay a few weeks later. Upon his arrival, father was even more surprised. He had expected the Reverend to be a man of similar years to himself. To find that the author of such a book was our age made the achievement, in his eyes, even more remarkable. His fondness for the Reverend grew, and they would discuss all matters Aztec late into the evening, often forgetting to dine. We soon learned that the Reverend was, like father, a widower, and that he had a daughter called Abigail. She came along with her father on his second visit. I liked her enormously, and father felt the same. It soon became apparent that he viewed the Reverend more like a son than a friend, and his daughter, by extension, as a substitute grandchild. My brother and I were initially grateful for this, as it led to Father being less critical of us. The shock came months later when he announced to us one morning at breakfast that he had altered his will to leave a substantial sum to the Reverend and his daughter. He made clear that it amounted to 1/3 of his estate. I estimate the value of the bequest to be around £40,000. That's a huge amount. My brother and I were distressed, as you can imagine, and we did protest. It was to no avail. Father warned that any further argument would lead us to being cut out of the will entirely. He said he would still have more than we deserved, and after being such disappointments to him, we should be happy with what we had been left. Gerald and I discussed it in private and decided that we would bide our time. Father could be quite impulsive, and we assumed he would change his mind. If he did not, we did discuss getting a doctor involved to attest to Father's mental state. That said, I'm not sure either of us is brave enough to pursue the idea. On the date in question, the Reverend and his daughter arrived in the early afternoon, just after 1 o'clock. We were informed that they had come via their hotel. The Reverend begged Father's pardon and explained that he would need to get back to his home promptly the next day. His verger, I believe, was stepping in to give the Sunday sermon, but the Reverend needed to be back at the vicarage by mid-afternoon. He therefore asked if it would be possible to have an early dinner to facilitate this. I was surprised that a guest would seek to affect the running of the house in this way. It struck me as rather rude. I also knew full well that Father hated his routine being affected. I was equally surprised, therefore, when Father agreed without any hesitation. They went off to look at the statue, and I went to arrange tea in the garden, which took place about half an hour later. Dinner was served at 5 o'clock, and during it, the Reverend, who had been looking increasingly uncomfortable, requested to talk to Father about a matter in private. When they later went to the study, Gerald and I escorted Miss Clark to the drawing room where I played cards with her. Gerald chose not to join in, but sat near to the door nursing a brandy. Barely 20 minutes later or so, the Reverend walked into the room looking pale, and Father shouted for Gerald to come to him. Gerald sighed, put down his brandy glass, and left the room. Not long afterwards, the Reverend, who had occupied Gerald's former chair, announced that he and his daughter needed to head back to their hotel. I think he would have liked to have left much earlier, but their cab had been arranged for 7 o'clock. As I escorted them through the hall to the door, we heard my father shouting at poor Gerald. I can quite understand how uncomfortable the Reverend was. After seeing them out, I closed the door and waited, listening to the raised voices. Shortly afterwards, Gerald left the study and closed the door behind him. He saw me, shrugged, and returned to his brandy. I tentatively knocked on the study door and opened it. Father looked up from his desk, his face quite red, and I simply told him that the Reverend had left. He said nothing in reply, so I closed the door. My brother retired about 2 hours later, and I did likewise. This would have been a little after 9 o'clock. The next day I was up at 6 o'clock, which is my custom. I came downstairs and could see the study door was ajar. I found Father on the floor and raised his head. His eyes flickered, and he mumbled something about a tall man in black. I noticed that the statue was missing and shouted for the maid, whom I first sent to get a blanket and then to get help. I explained everything to the doctor and local constable. The former removed my father to hospital, and the latter elected to communicate with Scotland Yard. A few hours later, an Inspector Lestrade arrived and examined the scene. He came swiftly to the obvious conclusion that someone had intruded from the outside. When he asked about valuables, I explained that there wasn't anything of substantial value outside of my father's collection. I gave him all the information I could, and he later departed for London to see Reverend Clark. About 1 hour before he departed, Inspector Lestrade had a bizarre interview with Gerald. My brother had asked if he could remove a table from Father's study. When the inspector asked him why, Gerald explained about an argument he had had with my father over it, and that Father had demanded its removal. He wished to obey Father's instruction. The inspector denied this request, stating that nothing must be touched. He then demanded all the keys for the study door and French windows before sealing the room. A constable was left on duty outside the French windows and is relieved each morning. Gerald has remained upset at this. I expect he wants Father to come home and not be annoyed at the table's continued presence. What has happened to Father is naturally distressing. Even though he treats us less than well, I worry for him. My brother has taken events to heart to a much greater extent. He loves Father despite it all and regularly bemoans the appearance of Reverend Clark in our lives. Of course, we both realize that if Father were to die, the will as written would be executed favoring the Reverend. Between us, in that event, I would approach a solicitor to see about challenging the will. Between us, she says. In that event, I would approach a solicitor to see about challenging the will. I believe we would have a good case with the will's principal beneficiary being the only suspect. You asked about Mr. Michael Hall, a giant brute of a man. He moved to the area some 4 years ago when he bought the adjoining land. He once queried the position of the border between our properties. Father later lost his temper when he found Mr. Hall trespassing on our land, claiming it was his, and challenged him to settle the matter in court. They have been to court at least a dozen times since, and Mr. Hall has usually lost, which has cost him heavily. They are currently engaged in their latest dispute, which, according to local gossip, if Father wins, will cost Mr. Hall dear. I accept that this could make him a suspect if it were not for the statue. In my opinion, he has no interest in the subject and therefore no motive to take it. I hope this is of some help. As was requested, my brother has also written a letter for Mr. Holmes. You will find it enclosed. Yours sincerely, Mrs. Grace Arnold. All right, so before we move on to the son's letter, there's a couple of interesting things here. I mean, she says, why would Mr. Hall steal it? But we know he found out, well, he may have found out it was very valuable. That might be a reason. Those of you who suspect the son of hiding the statue in the table he built get some support here. The son seems very eager to get that table out of the room. Definitely sounds suspicious, but could just be a red herring. The thing that jumps out to me is that the son does not like the Reverend, and yet he's pushing his father to invite the Reverend over. Like the daughter who previously told us how the son kept nagging the father to get the Reverend to come visit, now tells us that the son really doesn't want the Reverend coming over. Very suspicious. And we also hear about how much money the Reverend is due to get. That seems like it would be a reason not to kill the father, but then maybe we're being told that the son, based on his reaction, didn't want to kill the father, just wanted to make the father think that the Reverend had stolen it. All right, let's read the letter from the son. Let's get a feel for who is this son that is high up in our suspect list. Dear Mr. Holmes, I was surprised when my sister came to me and said you had written to ask for some particulars. Naturally, I am eager to help. I desire nothing more than my father back to health and that evil man in prison for what he has done. It is true, Father and I have a troubled relationship. I was never the marrying kind, and I don't think Father had an issue with that until he learned that Grace could not have children. He's a very dynastic-minded man and wanted the family to live on. My father comes from humble beginnings and has worked hard to build his career and reputation. Julia and I had known each other for some years prior to our marriage, and she, like me, was not especially interested in wedlock. Our parents forced us together, and we agreed to marry to please them. When the constant talk about grandchildren wore us both down, we admitted there would never be any. My father-in-law demanded I leave the marital home, which he had paid for, and Father reluctantly took me in. I won't go over the arrival of Reverend Clark in our lives, as I know my sister has covered that subject. I will, however, talk about the will. I don't think Grace and I had truly realized the depth of our father's disappointment until that day. To discover that he had, in all but name, adopted the Reverend and left him 1/3 of his estate was a considerable shock. As Grace has informed you, my father is impulsive, and he has often made a decision one day that he has reversed the next. But when time passed without this happening, I realized that the best chance lay in showing an interest in Father's passion. I began to ask him questions about his many artifacts, and I even persuaded him to lend me the Reverend's book. I was able to read it and discuss points with him. Although he doubted my sincerity, he did seem pleased at what I had learned. I hoped over time to impress him to the point where he might look on us favorably and reverse the change to his will. I was not necessarily seeking the Reverend's complete removal. I simply wanted the bequest to be smaller. I later had another idea and started carving Aztec-style ornaments for Father. This impressed him, and he did me the honor of displaying them around the house. All had been going well until I made the fateful decision to construct a table for Father. He had possessed a similar one which had been presented to him by my mother. Following her death, in a fit of despair, he had smashed it to pieces one evening and burnt it in the garden. I decided to make him a new one a few days before the Reverend's visit. I presented it to him a few hours before they arrived, and he seemed genuinely moved by it. Under his supervision, I positioned it in the study before Father hurried me out. I began to hope that this alone might lead to a change of heart on his part. I understand you have been told about the dinner at which the Reverend and his daughter were guests. The Reverend asked if he might speak to Father privately afterwards, and Father agreed. They went into the study and must have been in there for around 20 minutes. I remember the discussion being quite audible for the first 10 or so before the Reverend's voice lowered to the point where you could no longer hear him. About 5 minutes later, my father's voice became louder, and it was clear he was not happy. Shortly afterwards, the Reverend entered the room in which Grace and I were seated with his daughter. He looked ashen and decidedly worried. My father stepped out into the hallway. He shouted my name, summoning me into the study. As I obeyed, I was worried. My father almost never admitted Grace or I into the room. The last time I had been in it was when I had been permitted to position the table. Before that, I had not set foot in the study for about 2 months. I walked in, and he closed the door behind me. No sooner had he done so than he launched into a tirade about the table. He said it was an insult to my mother with its inferior quality, and he wanted it removed immediately. I was shocked and distressed, but assumed the anger being directed at me was partly to do with the mood his conversation with the Reverend had left him in. My father, despite his volatile temper, is conscious of appearance. I begged him to let me remove it in the morning. I said taking it out of the room in front of our guests would be embarrassing. He initially looked like he did not care. His face was crimson, but he calmed down enough to agree. He said he would let me into the room the next morning to remove the table, and he never expected to see or hear about it again. I left the room, leaving him to his temper and solitude. Don't think badly of me, Mr. Holmes, but these events gave me hope. If the Reverend was falling out of favor, it could only be good news for my sister and me. Father getting angry with us was a common enough occurrence, but anger with the Reverend was new. It was for this reason that I attempted to remove the table from the study the next day. This I was prevented from doing, which distresses me. When Father returns from hospital, I don't want him to be annoyed by its continued presence. My main hope is for his swift recovery in order that he can reverse those particular clauses in his will. Surely he will see the Reverend for what he is. I don't have any desire to consult a doctor or solicitor. I'd rather Father corrected matters of his own accord. Do let me know if I can assist further. Yours sincerely, Gerald Maxwell. All right, well, there is our letter for today. I would say that, if anything, the sun has probably risen up higher in our list of suspects. He has not revealed, as I thought he might, that he fancies the daughter. So there goes that excuse for why he wants the Reverend over, even though he doesn't like the Reverend. That makes no sense unless he's trying to frame the Reverend. And now the table seems even more suspicious. All right, what does the chat make of all this? Son even said he was not the marrying kind. So, I mean, a picture is emerging of our primary suspect being the son. The son doesn't like the Reverend. Not only is the Reverend getting a third of their money, but the Reverend is the son that the father, that Gerald should be. The son, he's jealous of the Reverend, doesn't like him, and yet is trying to encourage the father to invite him over. You could see why his plan is to stage an attack, make it look like the Reverend is the attacker, and then he kills two birds with one stone. He gets the Reverend out of the will and gets the Reverend out of their lives. In that scenario, you can see he may not intend to kill his father at all. He probably just intends to stage an attack dressed up as the Reverend. Maybe he doesn't even care about the statue, thus the idea of hiding it in the leg of the statue, rather than stealing it for its own sake. In that scenario, he doesn't want the statue, he just wants it hidden. It does feel a bit convoluted, though, to have to hide the statue in the table in the father's room. I mean, if the plan is to attack the father, make it look like the Reverend, you do have to disappear the statue. But do you really have to put it in the leg of the table? Wouldn't it's only 7 inches tall by 2 inches long? Wouldn't it be easier to go in, attack the father, carry the statue out, and then bury it or hide it somewhere? Hide it in a piece of custom-built furniture in the garage, in your workshop, in your room, why go through this convoluted effort of building a table where it can be hidden? The whole thing about hiding it in a table, that's sort of a locked room mystery premise where no one could have escaped with it, so you have to hide it in the room. But his plan clearly had to involve him attacking his father and then escaping. So why not just escape with the statue? It's also very odd how he describes building the table for the father, and he says the father loved it, said move it in, and then after the argument with the reverend, calls him in and says get rid of it. Is that all made up? It's only the son. The son is the only one who ever hears his father. The son is the only one whose word we have to take that his father didn't want the table in there. No one else hears the father say anything bad about it. Only the son reports that the father wants it out. One thing the table does do is it gets the son access to this room, right? The son says, I haven't been in his office for months, but I was there when I helped move the table in. Also, if the table is being made as a copy of the one he used to have from his mother, then it seems like the father would like it and not say it's so ugly. If it's a copy of one he used to have, I wonder if the son is just making this whole thing up. The son even has a story about why it's not moved out until after the attack. I mean, is this case as simple as this? That the son is planning to frame the reverend, hide the statue in the table. So he gets the father to invite over the reverend. When the reverend goes home, he stages this attack dressed up as the reverend. Doesn't intend to kill his father, just knock him out. Hides the statue in the table. I see one little flaw in this plan. Maybe it's not a super flaw, but well, I'll discuss it in a minute. Let me catch up on the chat. The son could not have predicted that the Reverend and his father would have a dispute, so he would have had to plan everything during that evening. I don't understand that complaint. The son could not have predicted that the Reverend and his father would have a dispute, so he would have had to plan everything that evening. That's not right. The dispute with the Reverend is totally unnecessary for the son's plans. The son's plans could involve framing the Reverend even without a dispute. Sandy says, I wouldn't blame the son for hiding the statue. The father's nasty, but I don't think he murdered his dad. Maybe the fight with the Reverend was about the missing statue. I don't understand that comment. Did he deliberately make something wrong with the copy to make his father dislike it and then have to remove it? He gains access to the room and can take the statue with it. Father likes it. I don't know. I mean, we are told that the father has a volatile mood. So maybe he likes it one day and the next day doesn't, but it does seem odd. The other thing that's a little odd is that the father is found in the morning murmuring about a man in black, tall man in black. So it's kind of hard to change your height. I really wish we were told how tall the son is. The other thing that's odd is what the son's plan was. Let's say that the son has staged this whole thing. So what was the son's plan? Did he not expect his father to be in the office and was hoping to go in, steal it? I still don't understand why if his plan is get in there and steal it and escape, why he would go to all the trouble of building the table. It just seems unnecessary. But also, what would your plan be? You go, you attack the father, you steal the statue, and then what? While the father is lying on the ground, hopefully passed out, you're unscrewing the leg to hide the statue in it? That seems very convoluted. It seems like if the father is not completely unconscious, you just want to run out. But maybe you didn't actually plan on the father being there. That's very odd. I don't understand how the father likes the table one moment and doesn't like it another. But they do say he's very impulsive. I decided to make him a new one. A few days before, I presented it to him a few hours before they arrived. He seemed genuinely moved by it. Under his supervision, I positioned it in the study. Maybe the Reverend commented on it and said, "What an ugly table." Or maybe the table is just a red herring, but it's still the son stealing this to frame the Reverend. I guess the biggest flare for me, the biggest flag, is how, by all accounts, the son really dislikes the Reverend, doesn't want his father associating with him, and yet from our last letter we know was encouraging his father, kept nagging his father to invite them over. To me, that's the biggest flag that the son is trying to frame the Reverend. How would the son frame the Reverend without the dispute and the money issue? I think you just frame him. It helps motive that the Reverend needs money, but I'm not sure you need it. We don't know statues in the office during the father's argument with the son. I'm not sure. Not sure. The Reverend may have left with the statue. This Reverend didn't leave with the statue. The Reverend left early in the evening. The father was in the office. The statue's in a glass case. You can't steal it without the father noticing. No one just walked out with the statue. Who told us the son wanted the Reverend over? We were told twice. Sandy says, I think the Reverend was angry about the missing statue. I don't understand that comment at all. Okay. Let us remind ourselves about Mr. Maxwell went on to explain that he had suggested to his father that the Reverend Clark be invited to see the Aztec statue. So the son, Gerald Maxwell, explains that he had told his father to bring over the Reverend Clark to see the statue. Furthermore, the sister supports the son's version, recalling that her brother regularly asked their father if he had yet invited the Reverend and asked when is he going to be coming to visit. That is bizarre. I mean, it's not bizarre, it's bizarre behavior from the son who doesn't like the Reverend, doesn't want him over, and yet here we're told that as soon as this Aztec statue came, he started nagging his father. Don't you want the Reverend to come see your statue? Don't you want the Reverend to come see your statue? When are they coming? That sounds like someone who's trying to frame the Reverend. And then we're told in our day's letter here that the son is acting a little sketchy. Look at what the daughter says. She says, the Reverend goes to talk with the father. And while the daughter and the daughter of the Reverend are playing cards, look how she describes her brother. Gerald chose not to join in, but sat near to the door nursing a brandy. He's like planning this attack, and maybe when he hears them fighting, he says, this is even better than I thought. Now I'm really going to be able to frame the Reverend. Shortly after, Gerald left the study, closed the door behind him. He saw me, shrugged. Okay, because she says the son goes in after the argument with the Reverend, and he gets yelled at by the father, shouting at poor Gerald. Then the son comes out, shrugs shoulders, retired 2 hours later. So she says the father is shouting at Gerald, and we other people confirm that he was yelling at him. Let's hear how the son describes that interaction. He hears the Reverend, so here's his father arguing with the Reverend. He shouted my name, the son says, summon him into the study. He's surprised that he's been asked into the study. And he says, I walked in, he closed the door behind me. No sooner was it done than he launched into a tirade about the table. He said it was an insult to my mother with its inferior quality, and he wanted it removed immediately. I think maybe, I'll tell you what I think. I think that the son has killed the father, has attacked the father, perhaps with the leg of the table or something. And that's why he's made up this story. I think they had a fight not over this table. I don't believe this. I don't believe that the father liked it so much in the morning that he let him bring it in and set it up, and then in the evening decides it's an insult and wants it removed. So I think their fight was about something different. And I think what happened was the son went in to steal the statue, and it's not hidden in the table. But I think what's happened is that the son was trying to frame the Reverend, and he had to attack his father, and there's something on the table, like blood, on the leg of the table or on some area of the table. And I think the son has made up this story about wanting the table removed, not because the statue is hidden in it, but because there's evidence on the table of the father being hit with it or something. I'm not sure though. Wouldn't he just assume that the blood on the table would implicate the reverend? Sandy says, I don't want to believe the son and daughter did it. What about the encyclopedia? Do you think it was lying on the table? Right, so the statue was used to attack the father, and that's why it's gone. No, I was thinking the table leg was used to attack the father. It's even possible that the son went into his father's study to find the will or something. Then the father starts to come in. The father surprises him, hits him on the head. But no, that doesn't work because tall man in black sounds like he's trying to frame the reverend. And it's too big a, well, So here's a little bit of a problem with framing the reverend. Here's a problem with framing the reverend. Imagine that you're the son and your plan is to frame the reverend, right? The reverend goes back to his hotel. Then you stage this attack and robbery at, say, 11 p.m. And your plan is that people will think the reverend did it. Now, the only reason why the police suspect the reverend is because the hotel workers see the reverend leave at 10 and not come back till midnight. But had the reverend not left the hotel for a 2-hour walk, the hotel workers would testify that he never left the hotel and he'd be completely in the clear. That seems to me like that would show you how impossibly unlikely it would be that you could frame the reverend. If you're the son, if you tried to frame the reverend, wouldn't the most likely scenario be that the hotel would say he never left the hotel, so he couldn't have done it? That makes it very difficult to frame the reverend. That makes life more troublesome. That makes things harder. Wow, now I feel a little more conflicted than I was before. I do like how this case is so confined to just this small cast of characters, though. I don't think I don't think anyone's trying to kill this guy. Why is there any evidence that it's Michael Hall who is my initial suspect? So Michael Hall sneaks in. He attacks the father, tries to steal the statue, which isn't a very smart thing because how is he ever going to pawn it? Hmm. Plus, there was no way to predict the father's last words. Well, I don't know if that's all that relevant. You don't have to predict the father's last words. You just have to have him see you come into the room looking like the Reverend and attack him. You don't need to. As long as you don't plan to kill him, you know he's going to wake up at some point and say, "A tall man in black attacked me." It's hard to disguise your height, though. So maybe the framing of the Reverend doesn't make sense, but then why is he trying to encourage the father to invite the Reverend over? There's always the possibility that the Reverend couldn't sleep and walked back to the house to talk to the father, or maybe even with the plan to steal the statue, and then stumbled on something. Hmm. I think we're going to have to wait till the next letter to resolve this further. All right, thank you for joining me. I'll see some of you tonight while we play Anna's Case for New York Noir called The Rookie. The rest of you next Sunday will read letter 3. Maybe things will become clearer when we do. I'll see you next time.